She was suspended for wearing her natural hair. But when her 70-year-old grandmother stormed the school, what happened next shut down the entire system. This isn't just a story about hair, it's a battle for identity, dignity, and the right to exist unapologetically. Stay with us, because this ending will leave you speechless. Chapter 1: The Incident at School. Maplewood High School, nestled in the suburban outskirts of the city, was the kind of school that prided itself on its tradition. The brick building stood tall and imposing, a reminder of the decades of academic excellence that had come before. Yet, behind its well-maintained walls and pristine lawns, there were the unspoken rules that students had to navigate, some of which were steeped in old-world thinking. Jasmine Thompson had always felt a sense of pride walking through the school's front gates. At 16, she was the type of student who excelled academically, participated in extracurriculars, and made her family proud. She was well-liked, with a radiant smile and a personality that drew people in. But more than anything, Jasmine had learned over the years to love herself, her natural, unapologetically curly hair, her African heritage, and the culture that shaped her. Her hair had always been a part of her identity, something she had come to cherish despite the occasional judgment she faced. On this particular Tuesday morning, however, Jasmine would experience something she could never have anticipated. Her day began like any other, filled with the usual school routines: her first period class, where she had to turn in an assignment on the civil rights movement; her second period, where she sat next to her best friend, Maya, and passed notes back and forth. Jasmine had worn her hair out that day, loose and natural, cascading in thick, defined curls. She always felt empowered when she wore it this way, but today, it would be the very thing that drew unwanted attention. It was during third period, as Jasmine was in the middle of taking notes for a chemistry test, that she was called to the principal's office. It was an unusual request. Most students were summoned for tardiness or discipline issues, but Jasmine had never been in trouble before. Her heart began to race as she gathered her belongings and made her way through the hallways. She had a sense that something was wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on it. When she arrived at the office, the secretary, Mrs. Mendez, greeted her with a polite smile, though her eyes seemed to carry an air of discomfort. "Mr. Harland would like to speak with you, Jasmine. Please take a seat." Jasmine sat down, waiting nervously as the minutes ticked by. Mr. Harland was the principal of Maplewood High, a man known for his stern demeanor and unwavering commitment to the school's rules. He was the kind of person who valued discipline above all else, but Jasmine had never had an issue with him before. She wondered what could possibly have warranted this meeting. Finally, the door opened, and Mr. Harland appeared. He was a tall, middle-aged man, always impeccably dressed in his suit and tie, with an expression that rarely showed emotion. Today, however, there was something in his eyes, something that gave Jasmine the feeling that she was about to face something unsettling. "Jasmine," Mr. Harland began, his voice calm yet firm, "I've asked you to come here because there's an issue we need to address." Jasmine nodded, trying to steady her nerves. "What's the issue, sir?" He gestured to the seat across from his desk, and as she sat down, he took a deep breath. "It's about your hair." Jasmine blinked, her confusion evident. "My hair? What about it?" Mr. Harland's gaze shifted, and for the first time, Jasmine saw a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. "The school has a dress code policy, and unfortunately, your hairstyle does not comply with our guidelines. It's distracting." He paused, seemingly choosing his words carefully. "It's simply too much for the environment here. You need to either tone it down or—" Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. "You're saying I have to change my hair?" He nodded. "I'm afraid it's causing disruption in the classroom, Jasmine. It's too wild, too untamed for the school's standards of neatness. If you don't comply, I will have to issue a suspension. You can either change your hairstyle or leave for the day." Jasmine's mind raced. She had heard rumors about the school's strict dress code, but she had never imagined that something as personal as her hair would be subject to regulation. Her natural hair, something that had been part of her identity for as long as she could remember, was now considered a problem. "But this is my natural hair," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's who I am. It's a part of my identity. I shouldn't have to change it to fit into someone's idea of neatness." Mr. Harland's expression remained unchanged. "I understand, but the rules are clear. Neatness is important. We expect all students to conform to the dress code, and unfortunately, your hairstyle violates that. You'll either need to fix it or face suspension." Jasmine sat there in disbelief. How could her hair be considered a violation? This wasn't just about a style, it was about her heritage, her pride, her culture. She thought about the history of black hair, the struggles and triumphs that came with embracing natural beauty, and how much work she had put into loving herself for who she was. For a moment, she opened her mouth to argue, to explain how absurd this situation was, but she realized it would be pointless. Mr. Harland had made up his mind. His decision was final. "Fine," Jasmine said quietly, standing up from the chair. "I'll leave." Mr. Harland's eyes followed her as she walked toward the door. "I'll expect you to come back tomorrow with your hair in compliance. If not, I'll have to take further action." Jasmine didn't respond. She didn't have to. The silence in the room felt like a heavy weight, pressing down on her chest as she walked out of the office. As she stepped into the hallway, her thoughts were a whirlwind. How could this be happening? She had always followed the rules, she had done everything right. And yet, here she was, being punished for something that was inherently hers, something she couldn't change even if she wanted to. She walked back to her locker, her hands trembling. Her best friend, Maya, was waiting for her, concern written all over her face. "What happened?" Maya asked. "They suspended me," Jasmine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They said my hair is too distracting, too wild. I have to change it or I can't come back." Maya's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? That's ridiculous. Your hair is beautiful, Jasmine. How can they do that?" "I don't know," Jasmine replied, her voice shaking. "I've never felt more alienated in my life." Maya placed a comforting hand on Jasmine's shoulder. "We need to talk to someone. This isn't right." But Jasmine wasn't sure what could be done. What could they say to make Mr. Harland understand? The school's policies were clear, and she wasn't sure how much power anyone had to change them. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Jasmine walked through the halls in a daze, her mind spinning with anger and confusion. The weight of what had just happened settled over her, but she knew there was someone she could turn to. She would have to go home and talk to the one person who would understand, her grandmother, Annabelle Thompson. Grandma Annabelle had lived through countless battles, seen the world change in ways that many could not imagine. She had fought for equality, for fairness, for the right to stand tall and proud in the face of adversity. Jasmine knew that if anyone could help her navigate this situation, it would be her grandmother. But before she could even pick up the phone, Jasmine's frustration turned into a quiet resolve. No matter what happened next, she was not going to let anyone take away her identity, not her hair, not her culture, and certainly not her pride. As she left school that afternoon, Jasmine's thoughts turned to her grandmother. She would need to make a call. And when she did, things would change. Chapter 2, The Call to Grandma. The drive home was an agonizing one for Jasmine. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white with the tension of what had just unfolded at school. The sounds of the radio filled the space inside her car, but they felt distant and muffled, as if the music belonged to another world. As she pulled into her driveway, Jasmine couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that she was on the brink of something important, a moment that would determine whether she'd remain passive or fight for her right to exist as she was. Jasmine lived in a small but warm home on the edge of Maplewood, with a modest front porch and a garden her mom tended to every spring. Her parents were both professionals, highly educated and successful in their own fields, but it was her grandmother, Annabelle Thompson, who had shaped the person Jasmine was becoming. Annabelle was a force of nature, a woman whose wisdom was rooted in decades of experience, not just in her professional life, but in navigating the nuances of race, identity, and what it meant to be unapologetically oneself. As Jasmine stepped out of the car and walked toward the front door, she could already feel the weight of the situation. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she fished it out, recognizing the number immediately. It was her mother. Jasmine wasn't ready to talk to her yet. She needed someone who could offer a different perspective, someone who had lived through times when fighting back wasn't just an option, but a necessity. She needed her grandmother. Without wasting any time, Jasmine pulled out her phone and dialed Grandma Annabelle's number. The phone rang only once before the familiar, deep voice of her grandmother answered. "Jasmine, what's going on, baby?" Grandma Annabelle's tone was calm, but Jasmine could hear the undercurrent of concern in her voice. She was always in tune with her granddaughter's emotions. Jasmine's throat tightened as she tried to form the words, but she could feel the tears welling up in her eyes. "Grandma, something happened today, at school. I got suspended." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, Grandma Annabelle's voice came through, clear and steady. "Tell me what happened." Jasmine recounted the events of the day, from the moment she'd been called to Mr. Harland's office, to the conversation about her hair, and the ultimatum he'd given her, change it or face suspension. She felt her chest tighten as she relived the moment. It had felt like such an invasion of her identity, a slap in the face to everything she had come to embrace and love about herself. Her hair wasn't just a style, it was a symbol of her heritage, her culture, and the resilience of generations of black women who had fought to be seen and accepted for who they were. "Grandma, he said my hair was too wild. Too distracting. He wants me to change it, or else I can't come back to school." When Grandma Annabelle spoke again, her voice was quiet but full of authority. You listen to me, Jasmine. No one, gets to tell you how to wear your hair. That hair of yours, those curls, they represent the legacy of your ancestors, the strength of our people. And no rule, no person, can take that away from you. This is about more than just a dress code. This is about dignity. This is about respect. Jasmine felt a rush of emotion, her grandmother's words reaching deep into her heart. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear that, to be reminded that her hair was part of something much bigger than a simple fashion choice. It was a testament to her identity, to who she was, and no one could strip that from her without a fight. Grandma, I don't know what to do. They're telling me to either change my hair or face suspension. I don't even know if I should go back. What if they just keep doing this? What if it gets worse? Grandma Annabelle paused for a moment, then spoke with a sense of purpose that only years of lived experience could bring. Jasmine, I want you to understand something. This isn't just about one school or one principal. This is about all the systems in place that try to control who you are, that try to make you fit into their narrow vision of what's acceptable. But you are not small. Your hair is not small. Your identity is not small. Jasmine sat down on the couch, the weight of her grandmother's words sinking in. The tears that had threatened to spill earlier began to fall now, though they weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of recognition. Jasmine had been caught in a moment of disbelief, unsure of how to respond to such an unfair situation. But her grandmother's voice, strong and comforting, had reminded her of her strength, of her power. I need you to do something for me, Jasmine, Grandma Annabelle continued, her voice now taking on a tone of resolve. You are going to go back to that school tomorrow. And you are going to stand tall, with your head held high. You're going to tell them, in no uncertain terms, that you will not change who you are for anyone. You're going to tell them that this is a fight for your identity and your rights as a human being. Jasmine's heart raced with determination. But, what if they just suspend me again? What if they don't listen? Listen to me, baby, Grandma Annabelle said softly. We're going to do this right. I'm going to meet you at that school tomorrow, and we're going to talk to Mr. Harlan together. I've dealt with people like him before. And I know exactly what needs to be done. Jasmine could feel her grandmother's confidence pouring into her, steadying her nerves. There was something about Grandma Annabelle's no-nonsense approach that always put Jasmine at ease. She had lived through decades of injustice, fought battles both big and small, and never once backed down when it mattered. I'll be there, Grandma, Jasmine said, a new sense of purpose surging through her. Thank you. You don't need to thank me, Jasmine, Grandma Annabelle replied. We're family. And family stands together. After they hung up, Jasmine felt a calm determination settle over her. She was no longer the frightened teenager caught in an unfair situation. She was a young woman with a history, with a legacy, and with a support system that would never let her down. She wasn't just fighting for her hair. She was fighting for her dignity, her identity, and her right to exist unapologetically in a world that often tried to make her feel less than. That evening, Jasmine did something she hadn't done in years. She looked through old family photos. She found pictures of her grandmother in her younger years, dressed in bold patterns and hairstyles that defied the conventions of the time. She found images of her mother, also proudly embracing her natural hair, walking through life with the confidence that only comes from knowing who you are and where you come from. Jasmine knew, deep down, that she was part of a larger movement, a movement that had always fought for acceptance, for change, and for the freedom to be themselves without apology. As the night wore on, Jasmine began to plan. She knew she couldn't face Mr. Harlan alone. She needed the strength and wisdom of her grandmother by her side. She would go to school the next day, not as a student fearing punishment, but as a young woman ready to stand up for herself, for her culture, and for all those who had fought before her. Tomorrow, Maplewood High School would learn that Jasmine Thompson was not someone to be silenced or intimidated. Tomorrow, her hair would no longer be something to be dismissed. It would be a symbol of resistance, of pride, and of an identity that refused to be erased. Jasmine wasn't just going back to school. She was going back to reclaim what was hers, her identity, her voice, and her dignity. And with Grandma Annabelle by her side, she knew she would win this fight. Chapter 3, The Stand. The morning sun rose over Maplewood, its light spilling over the town like a promise. Jasmine woke up early, her thoughts swirling like a storm in her head. She had barely slept, her mind racing with the events of yesterday. But today was different. Today wasn't about fear or uncertainty. Today was about standing her ground. She could still hear her grandmother's voice, steady and resolute, "You're going to stand tall, with your head held high. You're going to tell them, in no uncertain terms, that you will not change who you are for anyone." The words echoed in her mind as she got ready for the day, her fingers brushing through her natural curls with newfound confidence. She wasn't going to shrink or apologize for something that was fundamentally hers. It wasn't just about her hair, it was about her identity, her pride, and the legacy of every woman in her family who had fought against the odds. As Jasmine prepared for school, her heart thumped in her chest, but not from fear. It was the fire of resolve, burning stronger with every passing second. She knew that today was not just about one student standing up against one rule, it was about all the generations before her, the women in her family who had fought for their right to exist without being marginalized, without being forced to conform. By the time she finished breakfast, there was a knock on the door. Jasmine rushed to answer it, and there, standing on the front porch, was her grandmother, Annabelle Thompson. Even at 70, her grandmother had a presence that demanded attention. Tall, graceful, with a fierce look in her eye, she was dressed in a bold red jacket, her hair styled in the same rich, natural curls that Jasmine had inherited. Her expression was calm, but her eyes told a different story, a story of a woman who had seen injustice, fought back, and never backed down. "You ready, baby?" Grandma Annabelle asked with a knowing smile. Jasmine nodded, her chest swelling with pride. "I'm ready." Together, they walked to the car, where Grandma Annabelle held the door open for Jasmine, guiding her into the passenger seat. As they drove toward the school, the weight of the situation felt less heavy. Jasmine knew she wasn't alone. She had her grandmother by her side, someone who had seen it all, someone who had the strength to carry her through whatever was coming. The school loomed ahead, its brick walls imposing against the early morning light. As they parked in the lot, Jasmine's stomach fluttered with anticipation, but there was no fear anymore. There was only determination. She wasn't walking into that school as a victim, she was walking in as a force, ready to be seen and heard. When they entered the school's main office, the secretary, Mrs. Mendez, looked up from her desk, her eyes widening in surprise at the sight of Grandma Annabelle. "Good morning, Ms. Thompson. How can I help you?" "We need to speak with Principal Harland," Annabelle replied firmly, her voice carrying authority. Mrs. Mendez hesitated for a moment, but quickly picked up the phone. "I'll let him know you're here." Moments later, the door to the principal's office opened, and Mr. Harland appeared, his expression unreadable. He was as stiff as ever, with his starched shirt and neatly combed hair, but something in his eyes flickered when he saw the woman standing beside Jasmine. "Miss Thompson, I wasn't expecting you," Mr. Harland said, his tone formal but polite. Grandma Annabelle wasted no time. "I'm sure you weren't. But I'm here now, and I'd like to have a conversation with you about the suspension of my granddaughter." Jasmine stood by her grandmother's side, her hands clasped together, but her back straight. There was a quiet strength in her that she hadn't known was there until this very moment. "Of course," Mr. Harland said, stepping aside to let them into his office. The walls of his office were adorned with certificates and awards, symbols of his career, his authority. But Jasmine could see past them now. They were just paper, meaningless in the face of what was truly important, her dignity and her right to be herself. Once they were seated, Mr. Harland looked from Jasmine to her grandmother, his hands folded neatly on his desk. "I understand that this situation has caused some distress. But as I explained to Jasmine yesterday, the school's dress code is clear. We have policies in place that are meant to create a distraction-free environment for all students. And unfortunately, her hair, as it is, doesn't meet those standards." Grandma Annabelle didn't flinch. "Let me be clear, Mr. Harland. My granddaughter's hair is not a distraction. What's distracting is the way you've singled her out because of something that has nothing to do with her academic performance. You've chosen to target her for embracing her heritage, for expressing herself the way she was born." Mr. Harland opened his mouth to respond, but Grandma Annabelle held up a hand to stop him. "Let me finish. For too long, black students have been policed for how they look, for how they wear their hair, for simply existing in spaces that were never meant for them. You're not just upholding a dress code, you're upholding a system that tells our children they're not enough the way they are. That their natural hair isn't professional, isn't neat, isn't worthy of respect. But let me tell you something, Mr. Harland, Jasmine's hair is beautiful. It is regal. It is a part of her heritage, and it will never be something she changes to fit into a narrow, outdated standard." Jasmine could feel the weight of her grandmother's words hanging in the air, each one landing with precision. It was as if Grandma Annabelle had lifted the veil that had hidden the true issue at hand, revealing the injustice that lay beneath. This wasn't just about hair. This was about power, control, and the belief that certain bodies, certain identities, had to be erased or modified in order to be accepted. Mr. Harland shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable. "I understand your passion, Ms. Thompson, but the policy is there for a reason. It's for the benefit of the entire student body." "And that's where you're wrong," Grandma Annabelle replied, her voice calm but unyielding. You're not benefiting the students by forcing them to erase their culture, their identity. You're oppressing them. You're teaching them that conformity is more important than authenticity. And that's the real problem here. There was a long pause in the room. Jasmine could see the conflict in Mr. Harlan's eyes. He was a man who had spent his career enforcing rules, but now, faced with the truth, he seemed unsure of how to proceed. For the first time, Jasmine saw the cracks in his authority. Finally, he spoke, his voice lower than before. I didn't mean for it to come across like that. I thought I was just enforcing the rules, but I can see now that there's more to this than I realized. I'll have to think about it. Grandma Annabelle nodded, her gaze never leaving his. You do that, Mr. Harland. But let me make something clear, Jasmine will not change her hair. She will not be silenced. And if you choose to suspend her again, we will take this to the next level. We will not back down. There was a finality in her words that seemed to echo throughout the room, a quiet promise that no matter what happened, Jasmine's right to exist as she was would be upheld. Mr. Harland looked between the two of them, clearly realizing that this was no ordinary confrontation. This was a stand for something much bigger than just one student. This was a moment of reckoning, and it was one he couldn't easily dismiss. I'll make sure this is addressed, he said after a long pause, his voice strained. You'll hear from me soon. Grandma Annabelle stood, her posture regal, and Jasmine followed suit. We'll be waiting, Mr. Harland. But remember, this is not just about policies. This is about people. And you can't ignore that. With that, they turned and left the office. Jasmine's heart was pounding in her chest, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was from the power of standing up for herself, for her culture, and for every person who had ever been told they weren't good enough as they were. As they walked out of the school, Jasmine felt lighter than she had in days. The battle was far from over, but she had taken the first step. And with her grandmother's strength by her side, she knew she would never have to fight alone again. Word of what had happened at Maplewood High spread quickly. By the next day, the story was circulating across social media and local news outlets. A black student suspended for her natural hair, and a grandmother who walked into the principal's office and didn't just speak, but roared. For some, it was just another headline. But for others, students who had felt silenced, parents who had been exhausted by years of quiet discrimination, it was a spark. One that ignited conversations in classrooms, kitchens, barbershops, and churches across the country. Jasmine didn't return to school immediately. Not because she was afraid, but because her grandmother, her family, and their legal advisor wanted the school to respond officially before she stepped foot back into that building. And just 2 days later, a statement came from the school board. The principal, Mr. Harland, had issued a formal apology, not only to Jasmine but to all students who had been affected by the school's outdated grooming policy. The board announced a full review of the dress code, with input from a new diversity and inclusion council composed of students, parents, educators, and civil rights leaders. More than that, the board declared that effective immediately, students would be free to wear their hair in any natural style, including afros, locks, braids, twists, and more, without fear of punishment or discrimination. It was a victory. Not just for Jasmine, but for every student who had been told, you don't belong unless you change. On Monday, Jasmine walked through the front doors of Maplewood High with her grandmother by her side. This time, there were no sneers, no sideways glances. Instead, students clapped. Teachers smiled. And a few even shed quiet tears. It was clear that Jasmine had not only stood up for herself, she had stood up for all of them. As she made her way down the hallway, something inside her shifted. She had walked into this school once feeling invisible. Today, she walked with purpose. With pride. She was no longer just a student. She was a symbol. A changemaker. Later that afternoon, during a special school assembly, the principal took the stage. With the gymnasium full, Mr. Harland took a deep breath and acknowledged the school's failure. We were wrong, he said plainly. We failed to listen. We failed to see. But thanks to the courage of one student, and the wisdom of her grandmother, we now have the chance to do better. Then he invited Jasmine and her grandmother to the stage. The crowd rose to their feet, applauding loudly as Jasmine walked up, her curls shining under the lights. She looked out into the sea of faces, some she knew, many she didn't, and held the microphone with steady hands. I didn't choose this fight, she began. But I chose not to back down. She paused, her voice calm, her gaze unwavering. My hair isn't a problem. It's not a distraction. It's not unprofessional. It's mine. It's part of my story. And no student should ever be made to feel ashamed for being themselves. The crowd was silent, hanging on her every word. I stood up because I had to. But I also stood up because I had someone behind me who taught me I'm worth standing up for. She turned to look at her grandmother, who nodded with quiet pride. If you're out there and you feel like you don't belong, or that you have to change to be accepted, please know you are already enough. And change is possible. But sometimes, someone has to go first. With that, the crowd erupted into applause. In the weeks that followed, Jasmine was invited to speak at community forums, youth leadership conferences, and even appeared on a national morning show with her grandmother. The pair became known affectionately as the Maplewood Duo, a symbol of generational strength and the power of speaking truth to authority. But to Jasmine, she wasn't a hero. She was just a girl who said, "No more." A girl who wore her hair exactly how it grew from her head, and who refused to let anyone define her worth. And her grandmother? She wasn't surprised. She had seen this fire in Jasmine since the day she was born. And now, the world had seen it too. As spring rolled into summer, Jasmine stood under the porch light one evening, watching the stars. Her grandmother joined her with 2 mugs of hot tea. "You changed things, baby," Grandma Annabelle said, handing her the cup. Jasmine smiled. "We did." And as the two of them sat there, side by side, sipping tea and watching the sky, it wasn't hard to imagine a better world on the horizon, one where no child would ever be punished for simply being who they are. A world they were building, one voice at a time. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Stand with Jasmine. Stand with every student fighting to be seen. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever faced a moment where you had to stand up for yourself or someone you love? And remember, your voice matters. See you in the next story.